Have a question, please form a line.
I just wanted to read something from Dr. Erwin Redlener, Director of the National Center for Disaster Preparedness at Columbia University School of Public Health. He stated, "I'm very concerned about the proposed plan to expand the Algonquin pipeline without a thorough, objective review of the environmental impact and potential public health risks that might be posed by this project. Of particular concern is the proximity of the project to a significant seismic zone in the Indian Point nuclear plant. This combination of factors presents a real risk of major disaster with profound long-term impact on the region. I truly hope that the time and resources will be made available to assess the safety of the project and reassure the public that every possible risk has been properly examined." Rick, how do we phrase our comment to FERC to make sure that that analysis is conducted in depth?
Well, I think you have to have somebody who's familiar with the Indian plant say, look, generally these are the facilities that are probably greatest risk in a blast scenario, but more likely a thermal scenario. And there'll be parts of the plant that can survive a lot of force. But like, I've heard a lot of discussions over the days about the fuel rod storage and okay, where are those facilities and what structures are around them? And so the way you'd phrase it, I'd say, is somebody who understands the new plant layout, general layout, and you have to be sensitive to, shielding of security blankets here that'll block public information. But a lot of this stuff, a common person can pretty well figure out. So you need to ask for an evaluation identifying the sensitive areas of the Indian plant and what Indian Point plant, and how are they adequately protected from this 42 in the event of rupture. And if they can't give you those answers, then you need to move the 42-inch well away from the plant.
All right, thank you. Please step right up here to the mic.
I hope I'm not going to add another factor to it, but I'm under the understanding that these pipelines are now going to be controlled by computers. And we've had a lot of information about hacking computers. And I'm just interested in knowing if this adds another layer of complexity to this.
A prudent pipeline company will design their computer systems so that they cannot be taken over or hacked or integrated. And the key word is prudent. I've advocated this for many decades. There are ways to design this where even if they took over the computer, they could not cause the pipeline to be in an unsafe condition. So that can be done. It may be done. It may have already been done. We just don't know that.
There's an extremely high level of radon in the Marcellus shale gas, and the half-life for radon is 3.8 days. So I wanted to know, in view of that, do you, anybody here, I guess, but I guess mostly the pipeline expert, do you have an estimate of how long it takes to get the frac gas from the well site through the processing stations, the compressor stations, metering stations, and any other steps that they need to do to get it to people's homes?
It depends on the. I don't want to sound cute here. I'm giving you an honest answer. It depends on the particular pipeline system, but it's going to be many days usually for even a fairly short transmission pipeline. When I say short, under several, let's say a few hundred miles. So it's going to be some days.
Would that make the radon issue less of a health issue?
The chemist is probably the one who should be the best. I'm not trying to dance around it. If it's going to take so many days, then the half-life is less than a day or two.
No, the half-life is 3.8 days.
So earlier this week, we had a meeting with some of the representatives at the state level in the city of New York, and they are drafting a bill to require that the gas that is delivered by the transmission pipelines to the city of New York as it goes through those gate stations all the way around, be analyzed for radon. And they are hoping to establish a concentration at which, if that gas has over the concentration of radon, they will shut down that pipeline and not let it distribute inside the city. And this would be a first attempt and a first issue. And if they succeed in doing it there, then there will probably be successes in other communities. But the issue is, once they identify that, they identify which pipelines are carrying the hottest radium, and then they will start moving to requiring sampling in individual homes and businesses to determine how much of that hot gas has been distributed. The other issue is the Louisiana offshore Gulf of Mexico gas does not have very high concentrations of radon, and so we talked about how frequently the monitoring would be required, and I told them if they did it once a year, the gas company would know when it was going to happen, because the gas company has to contract for it. And they'd be sure and put the majority of Louisiana gas in the pipeline in anticipation of not being distributing that much shale gas from Pennsylvania, from the Marcellus, at the time that it's monitored. So we have to have some fail-safe mechanisms to really determine that. But that's going to be a great start if we can accomplish that.
Two questions. One, the incinerator in Peekskill is already emitting toxins into the air. I think some of them might be the same as on your list. And also we have the nuclear power plant emitting. And I just wonder synergistically if anyone is looking into that, the draft, if that meets in the air and what impact that has, because we're already exposed.
Okay. So if you can get the data on the modeling at both facilities to see how far out all the chemicals extend in excess of the accepted criteria, then you can also see if there's an overlap of this plume and where it comes together. And that's the most vulnerable area. But again, a lot of that is proprietary now because of the fear of the terrorists.
The other question, is it Steve in Connecticut, is could you explain to the group how you did the monitoring of the hum?
First of all, just living in it, if you're sensitized to it, you hear it, and when they start pumping this stuff, and what they do is at nighttime, after midnight, they get these nominations. I heard somebody talking, they take it out of storage and really pump it, so the worst time you have these hums is after midnight, when most people have insomnia all the time at a certain time. But so it's an observation, feelings. The most scientific way, because you have to take the physiological part of this whole equation out, because only 2 to 3% of the people really hear this. 100% of the people are being affected. Is you use computer programs and things called fast Fourier transform analysis. Basically, it looks at all the different frequencies and it tells you how it's acting, and you can watch it. 1/3 band octave analysis, you can see where you have the low frequency, which is an unusually characteristically high low frequencies where they shouldn't be. You can use a simple sound meter when you have a delta of 20 to 25 dB between a dBA scale and a dBc scale. A dBA scale is a higher level that doesn't take into account low frequency. A dBc scale takes low frequency into account. And if you have a difference with a simple sound meter, that's decent sound meter, you can tell if you have a low frequency problem. What's happening is the low frequencies, these sound waves basically resonate structures that are enclosed and act like speakers. That's where you get a vibration in the house and you get the hum that's occurring. And depending on the kind of construction you have. Typically outside you won't hear the sound. It is, you have to generally have a structure to resonate. You can sit in a car as a structure and also get the sound, but fast Fourier transform analysis is the best. Spectrographs, computer programs.
Question I have has to do with the two compressor stations in New York as an example, that are being greatly expanded. The one in Stony Point in Rockland County and the one here in Putnam County Southeast. The one at Stony Point is across the river, but the river is not that far, not that wide. And Susanna had pointed out that the westerly winds could bring the toxic emissions across the Hudson, and the combination or cumulative impacts has been a word that's been used, or a term used often this evening. Could that be commented on a little further, and the combination of this enormous tonnage from each of these two compressor stations now combining?
Again, you have to have the modeling to determine how big an area of impact, but based on the data that we've accumulated over the years, we know that 2 to 3 miles out from a compressor, you have severe health impacts. So if you plot the 2 to 3 mile radius of both of them, you see whether it overlaps, and then you consider the westerly winds and how it may skew that radius.
It has to do also with what pollutants you're looking at. So things like volatile organic compounds are not going to travel as far, particulate matter. But as Wilma was describing, what happens with NOx and VOCs that combine to form ground level ozone. Now smog is something that does travel quite a bit of a distance. Some research suggests up to 200 miles away, even downwind. So that's more of a regional issue. Whereas the other pollutants are more of a, the impact will be several miles away downwind.
Just one part B to that question is the information about health impacts 2 to 3 miles radius around these compressor stations. In those areas, there are symptoms that you describe. Those areas outside of the 2 to 3 miles, there are impacts not necessarily with symptoms. So could you address that?
So the evaluation we've done is we've seen the severe impacts out 2 to 3 miles. And then we also are able to document additional impacts that we don't qualify as severe outside that area. So it's a much larger area than just a 2 to 3 mile radius.
And I guess I'll just add, because it goes back to my favorite word of the evening, cumulative, is that, like in Pennsylvania, at least, we ended up with 108 surveys from across the state, and there were a lot of similar patterns in the symptoms reported. And we looked at 3 types of facilities, which is the waste impoundments, gas wells, and compressor stations. And there are a lot of people who are living with a bunch of different facilities all around them. And so that's where you start to get the question, like, even if, any operator will say, well, it's not my facility, it's his facility, or look at that one over there. But in a way, and that's just to underscore what Wilma and Matt are saying, that, you need to look at it as what's called an airshed, what's happening in the air above you. And, even if you can't pinpoint it to one particular facility, you're still getting the aggregate air issues, and in some cases aggregate water issues, and that's the point to focus on.
My question is really for anybody on the panel. I'm curious what techniques have been successful in stopping these projects. I haven't really heard anything about, get your town board to vote to say no. This is what can actually be done to put the brake on it completely if that's what people decided to do. So I'm curious if there are any success stories in that regard.
Yeah, there have actually been successes in Pennsylvania stopping a FERC-regulated pipeline momentarily. Let me just say momentarily, and it began with moving the route of the pipeline first. So there was a group that was pretty organized in Lancaster County and got the route changed to completely avoid their county. And then later the company withdrew, and there was no reason in the news, nothing about why they did it. I was trying to dig up a little information on it today and couldn't find anything, but apparently, and unfortunately, they're good. that pipeline's been sold to another company. We think it might come back in another form and another location altogether. So it's going to be probably another battle. But that's to say that local organizing and citizen power did have an impact, and I do see lots of sort of changes made along the way during these the scoping process of the FERC, the entire FERC process. There's another project, East Side Expansion in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and that one too, there were a lot of people that came out to the scoping public hearings and meetings and requested, that the pipeline go around where people are living, and because it had been originally proposed to go right by people's houses, so they asked for alternatives, and the company came back with alternatives, and that seems to be working for them. Again, like I said, the reason that the main reason FERC set up the pre-filing scoping portion is to avoid litigation and to deal with these issues. So it is the company, it's in their best interest to make these adaptations, changes ahead of time, so you can get some leeway there. But also, I mean, there's been groups, like you guys, stop the X pipeline. You make a website, you have a Facebook, and that shows that's great, I think, to do, and that has worked in the Commonwealth pipeline example. I know the Constitution pipeline, which goes into New York from Pennsylvania, they've been really effective in organizing. They haven't stopped anything yet, but there's legal hooks that I know Clean Air Council is working on with the Constitution pipeline. There's people on the ground doing great organizing work. I'll share one or two other things real quick. There was a group that actually stopped the compressor station that wasn't on a transmission line as big as these that we're talking about. It's on a smaller intrastate transmission line in Luzerne County in Pennsylvania, and that was done through a lot of political pressure by the citizens at public hearings with the zoning hearing board, township officials. They pulled us to get involved legally and just put a lot of pressure on the company. The company backed out and said it basically wasn't worth their time and energy to deal with these people. They want to try to figure out some other way to get what they needed more effectively. Doesn't look like they figured that out yet, and it's been a while. It's been probably over a year now. So we're, again, that's a situation. You have to monitor these things when you have those wins to make sure that you keep your win. But there have been, I share this because there have been examples that citizens have been effective, and a lot of times, the question was asked at last night's presentation, what can we do to stop this? Is it really going to, is FERC going to approve this? Is the DEC going to approve this? And our answers, and Rick will chime in here, I'm sure, yes, they will. Very likely. It's very likely FERC will approve it. It's very likely DEC will approve the air permits and the water permits that are required. And really, I truly believe that the best option that people have is to organize a campaign against the pipeline if you want to stop it.
Excuse me, I wanted to just comment briefly about something that we feel might be effective. We have a legislator from Westchester County in the back of the room, Legislator Kaplowitz. We actually met with about 5 or 6 other legislators today with our experts, and they have written a letter to the FERC after the scoping meeting in Cortland. Very strong letter. They want more. They're very anxious to have more input. Please call your county legislator. We have put on our website contact information. It's actually just the central number because you may not know what district you live in Putnam or in Westchester. Call the central number, write to them, write letters to the editor. Susanna will outline this more, but I know for a fact that in Westchester County, they are anxious to get good comments, and they want help from the public, and they are working as a partner with us to work to stop this pipeline, or at least they say that they are. The experts do.
Give your website.
It's SAPE20162016.org, SAPE2016.org. it's on a handout. We're going to do, after this other woman would like to ask the last question, but Susanna is going to talk about the action steps. And yes, FERC does rubber stamp. They look to this as a way to increase gas around the country. We're all just in the line, and we have friends in all communities that are affected this way all across the country. Yes, and I want to let this lady have her last question, but before we get to the action steps, there is a very short video that we want to show you about mini sinks FLIR from an IR camera that Wilma will describe. But I just want to let this lady have her chance.
I hope it's a short answer so they can get to the video, but we've talked all night about air quality, and regarding the health impacts, I'm wondering, we're in a very fertile area with soil and a lot of organic farms, a growing number, actually expanding community of farming. So what is the bioaccumulation impact on the soil, as well as the backwash impact on the rivers and in the local communities and watersheds? I know there's probably a giant answer to that, but is the impact in the reports that you're looking at, including besides air quality, all these issues, and where do we get that information?
You want to answer?
Well, I'll just say, I mean, these are, even aside from what is emitted, which is what we've been focusing on with the compressors, they're major construction projects. I mean, going through the Hudson River, I can't even, yanking it, whatever. It's in a way unfathomable. A lot of the water quality issues that we're starting to see in the Susquehanna Basin, in the Pennsylvania section of the basin, actually have a lot to do with erosion and sedimentation of streams, of local streams, which are water quality, and then you're getting into fishery issues as well. So there's a lot that is just starting to come out. But yes, any major construction project that's a land disturbance issue is also going to have other problems. And of course, some of these pipeline ruptures, particularly, I mean, these would be gas, but, and chemical spills or whatever else is involved, it definitely would have a water impact as well. And a lot on the soil and agriculture is still not known, but you have spoken about it.
Sure. So the contamination in the water and the sediment and the soil will bioaccumulate in the crops as well as in other animals that inhabit the area. The issue is that crops are not required to be analyzed and tested and don't have criteria for these chemicals. So it will happen, and yet no one will know what's going on for some time. And then if there's an outbreak of some type of event, then they may come back and start looking. But it won't be very obvious for a long time. But every time there's a new spill or a new leak, that's more pollution that's being added to the ecosystem that's available to bioaccumulate. And particularly the polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons, because they're so long-lasting, they also bioaccumulate. And that's what happened at the B spill, is that the organisms in the Gulf of Mexico were bioaccumulating the polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons into their tissue.
Can I just, one really quick thing, which I hope will be inspiring and uplifting. Did anyone hear about Dallas passing their ordinance yesterday? Yes. So Dallas, Dallas, Texas, center of the oil and gas empire, J.R. Ewing's city, as we like to call it, passed an ordinance. They realized that they couldn't do a ban, but they passed an ordinance through their zoning and other powers that were vested in the city. I encourage you to go online and read about it. I almost get goosebumps when I read about it, but one of the things that's included in there is no compressor stations anywhere but in zones that are for industrial and manufacturing purposes. No compressor stations in residential areas. So this is going to be a huge shift for the oil and gas industry. So that, I think, gets to the heart of a win too, is require operators to follow the lead of your towns and cities. And zoning is a really critical way to do that.
So my name is Anne Marie Garty, and I'm involved with the Constitution Pipeline, which is a new pipeline that would run from Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania, up to Schoharie County, New York, which is near Albany. It would be about 124 miles in length if built. So there's, they pre-filed last May, they filed in June of 2013. They want to actually get it constructed by spring of 2015 and in operation. I don't think it's very realistic, but anyway, that's their intention. And we're trying to stop them. But one thing that we haven't done at all is any of this baseline testing that you talked about. So do you have either on your website or someplace a method, like telling people how you actually go about doing all of this? And I guess, environmental impacts, like how to do air studies or soil or water is one thing, but how do you actually get a baseline health study done?
I have a health survey instrument.
Is it available on your website or
That's
something?
being used in a number of communities. And so you can use it for baseline, and then as the process moves forward, then you can ask a question again about what new health impacts have you had as a result of the project. I also do an Odorant Symptom Log, which is like one page front and back, where if you have an odor event and you start having health impacts, you fill it out. We're going to put it up on the MiniSync website to where you can go right online, fill it out, and then it asks that you do wind speed and direction, like go on the TV or on your cell phone, and it tells you, and record the wind speed and direction, and then hit send, and then whoever receives it, they're talking about me receiving it and Pramila receiving it. And then if I get 5 or 6 or 7 in a couple hours, something's going on. So then you can start figuring out who's had a release, who's causing it, or is the weather sitting down and holding the emissions into the area. But I do have also water sampling for baseline and a whole list of parameters, and they can be transferred to air as well. So I'll provide that to you.
Okay, thank you very much.
What is the website, please?
What is your website?
Lean, LEANWEB.org. It's Louisiana Environmental Action Network.
Whoa. Sorry.
Say that again?
Lean, LEANWEB.org. And it's the Louisiana Environmental Action Network website.
Thank you very much.
And I'll also put the presentation up on that.
Ms. Subra, I was wondering about prevailing westerlies across the country. If these Stony Point compressors are on the west side of the Hudson, and the normal breeze comes from the west, and you said that the severe impact can be up to 3 miles, 2 to 3 miles, do people then living on the east side of the Hudson, how wide is the Hudson here? Does anyone know?
3,600 feet, 1 to 2 miles.
3,600 feet.
1 to what?
3,600 feet.
3,600 feet.
So the answer is yes, it has the potential. So that's why it's important to know the wind speed and direction when you report an odor event or symptom.
And you mentioned temperature inversion, days when it's very hot and humid and you feel not able to breathe very easily anyway. Is that indicative of a temperature inversion when things are being held close to the ground?
In Louisiana, that's just a normal humid day. But yes, in some cases, but also it could be the ozone accumulating over the hot part of the day and then tapering off at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you want to consider doing some little air monitoring, like you could get an ozone meter, and on those kind of days, have somebody go out and take some ozone. And the ozone meters are cheap enough that you could get. But also, the state agency has ozone monitoring stations, and you can look on their website and see whether it's an orange day or a red day.
Yeah, the temperature inversions typically happen when there's warm air sitting above cool air and it traps the ground level ozone, sometimes particulate matter, close to where people are living, And it happens most often in areas with mountains and valleys.
Okay, just to step away for a moment from the pipelines and the compressor stations and talk a little bit about the radon gas in the gas supply. We know that I believe on the website, it appears that this particular pipeline is not slated to distribute gas in this immediate region, meaning Westchester County, Rockland, and Putnam counties, but the demand will be in Connecticut. But we do know that Spectra Energy has a pipeline that was completed in New York City, and that just went online in November, and it is delivering Marcellus shale gas from Pennsylvania. And residents in New York City quite a few have done baseline testing prior to that November 1st start date. That same pipeline, actually the utilities company has built extension lines from the Spectra pipeline into New York City throughout its 5 boroughs, and has built a gas line from the Bronx connecting into Westchester. So most of Westchester that is serviced by that utility company is also potentially receiving high levels of radon gas in the gas supply right now as of November 1, or at least mixing with the traditional gas supply from Louisiana, which has very, very low levels of radon. So could you speak to this particular issue, talking about the entry or the introduction of this radon gas into living spaces through kitchen stoves, ovens, gas dryers, hot water heaters, boilers, and so forth. Those kinds of gas-fueled appliances, the potential impacts, the routes of exposure, those kinds of things, and the kinds of things that people here could do about that.
Sure. So the Louisiana or the Gulf Coast gas, natural gas, has very, very low levels of radiation and radon. And the Marcellus shale has very high levels. Earlier this week, we had meetings in New York City with state representatives where they're looking at requiring monitoring at all the gate stations that feed into New York and become then part of the distribution system that people pay money for. So at the gate stations around, the emphasis would be analyzing the radon concentration in that gas and setting a standard, and when it exceeded that standard, shutting that gate station down immediately so that the radon gas in the natural gas does not get into people's homes, where if you have a gas heater, you have a gas hot water heater, you have a gas stove, you would be exposed to it. The discussion was this would be the first part of the process, and then additional monitoring in the homes to determine what kind of concentrations and what kind of risk are going on in the homes, but also be able to test the gas that's in that home or being supplied to that home, and so you could have a correlation that when the concentration in the natural gas is such and such, this is what you'd expect. And you're going to have to ask questions like how sealed up the house is versus how not sealed up and things like that. But again, the industry's going to fight it, but at least it would be a starting point to identify what risks are going on in the homes. Now, some people are doing their own testing, and some people already test because from the rock formation. But the issue is you can identify the differences if it's coming from the rock formation than if it's coming from the natural gas. So you need to start watching for that. The bill is being tweaked right now, but it's going to be something critical. And you in this area also will be the recipients of that kind of gas. And so if you have a gas stove or a gas hot water heater or things like that, you need to be concerned as well. And they can blend it with the Louisiana source to reduce the concentration. And one of the discussions was, we'll require them to test once a year and it'll be a voluntary test. Well, what are they going to do? They can blend it with mostly Louisiana because they're going to be able to say, we're going to test next Tuesday and we know if we do this blend, it'll pass. They may have lots of data which they're not providing to any of us. So this process will have a lot of public data.
Well, I guess I would like to focus on prevention rather than cure. And I'm wondering how effective individual citizens, organizations, and local governments, such as the Westchester County, hopefully Putnam County, can be in putting a stop to the expansion of the natural gas systems. Can we stop it?
To the infrastructure?
Yeah, can we stop it?
Why don't you ask Rick?
Anyone.
Who's the FERC expert?
FERC very seldom turns down any application for a gas system. It's very rare. It's like they're preordained to make that infrastructure work, whether you agree with it or not. The hook is usually they can't violate existing environmental regulations. We've talked a little about that here. So I don't want to discourage anybody, and never underestimate the power of a grassroots local governments. It's tough nowadays because they're running out of money and they've been intentionally starved in many areas of the country just to weaken them. But it's amazing how in this country the local governments it ebbs and flows, but they can have more say than the industry may want to. And again, I'm not trying to start a battle between local governments and that, but this is America, and the local and state governments have more power than you may want to think about, but you got to bring them together and get the will.
Thank you.
And I'll just add to that, state agencies are also, they have discretion on whether or not they give these permits out too, but almost 100% of the time they're going to approve air permits, water permits required for these facilities. And I mean, really the only time I've seen projects not go through is when there's been a lot of public outcry, public opposition. There's been a real organized community. And it's really thought through how to tell the company. It's been like basically targeting the company, letting them know that they're not wanted, and figuring out schemes to make that happen. I've seen it happen in a few situations. I will say that the few have not been related to a FERC regulated pipeline, but nonetheless, a natural gas fired power plant in Texas, where a company walked away due to public opposition and not having, I think, enough investment for that project, and then another where the company was being followed around by community members at public hearings, at educational events put on by the company, and just told that they did not want a compressor station in the town. They showed up and testified all over the place. Eventually, we actually got involved in a lawsuit representing this group of citizens, and just enough pressure was put on that the company withdrew the permit and walked away from it. We haven't seen anything since that's been proposed for the area. So that's there is, I think, basically Rick's right. Absolutely, FERC's going to try to approve this. DEC is going to approve this, all the permits for it, very likely. So I would say the only hope is trying to get organized and figure out a strategy to target the company, hit them where it hurts, hit them in the wallet, see what you can do.
Yeah, and don't be discouraged by the amount of money that's involved here. There's nothing wrong with arguing to try to do it right. Then there are companies who will try to do that. They may be in the minority from your perspective. So don't be discouraged to try to do a good fight. You gotta really get your act together, and it's a tough road after as many as expansions that have gone here.
This may be a follow-up to the previous question. This summer, Spectra did extensive surveying of the route of the Algonquin pipeline through the Blue Mountain Reservation, a 1,600-acre county preserve near here. And when I spoke to them, they said that that the pipeline was 40 to 50 years old and that they needed to replace it to maintain its safety. They didn't say anything about expanding it. I'm concerned about the impact of the construction on this natural area. Is there anything that we can do to counter their argument that all they're doing is preserving the safety of the existing pipeline?
If you're asking me that, the answer is yes. I mean, they're using an example of trying to replace a 26-inch with a 42-inch on the existing right-of-way. And again, it depends on the location and all that. But a conscientious pipeline company, I've seen very unconscientious pipeline companies where land is essentially free, just taking whatever they can and stripping, the right-of-ways or the expanded right-of-ways. But there are ways for a conscientious company, if there really is a bona fide threat with the older pipeline, they can solve that problem and minimize the impact if there's the will.
I have a money question. You mentioned all the health problems that this whole infrastructure is going to do. Has anybody put a dollar sign on the costs of health care? And that will occur. The Mount Sinai Environment and the Children came out with a New York study, and they put a cost for the children in toxic environments costing New York State $4.3 billion a year. Now, I don't know if it's not just relating to fracking and the infrastructure, but if nobody has the price tag, the externality price tag, is there any suggestion of how we could research this price tag? Because I think when you submit the price tag to the government, they might flinch thinking that this is what they're going to have to pay out in the future.
This is Matt. I'll make a quick comment related to the RAND study, research and development, the think tank group I was talking about before. This is just for Pennsylvania. They found damages in the range of $7.2 to $32 million, and they did say a lot of that was health impacts. We'd have to look at the study to get the exact breakdowns and sort of the scope and time length of those damages costs. But that's the work. That's some of the work I know on the health impacts piece of it. That, economics due to health effects.
Question for you. On your presentation, you said that the nitrogen oxides and the carbon oxide and dioxides would be higher in Southeast rather than Stony Point.
Right.
Any reason or rationale for that? Because Stony Point is such a larger facility.
These were the values that the company gave
Okay.
to the agencies.
Because it just doesn't make sense that if one is 72, or I think one is 50,000 horsepower, the other is 40,000. It doesn't make sense that the 40,000 would give off more.
I know.
Okay. One of the main things
It could be a different model compressor too. Don't lose sight of that.
Yeah, they might have different engines. Sometimes they'll have like the centrifugal. I thought a lot of them had centrifugal engines, which I know we didn't get into, but I think some could have reciprocating, and if they did, it might, it could. The emission rates could definitely vary based on the models they're using.
Yeah, well,
what I would add is even the centrifugals, the models themselves can be which generation.
Sure.
Right. No, because some of the numbers that are in these reports are changing significantly, and they're July report, they said the line carries 3.3 billion cubic feet per day. When they submitted it in November, for some reason, it's down to 2.6 billion cubic feet per day. They lost 700 million cubic feet, 700 million cubic feet per day of capacity.
Moving target, and frequently, some of the number changes are a result of pressure that the community has brought.
Okay. One of the things I saw in a local paper, which unfortunately I didn't copy, but I guess some of the counties upstate with the fracking fluid that gets blown off, I guess they're using it, in order to get rid of it, they're using it for dust control on local roads.
When I reviewed Pennsylvania's program in the later 80s or early 90s, they were using produced water or brine that had all the hydrocarbons in it for dust control.
Right.
Since then, they've phased that out, but some states still allow produced water to be used, or brine, as dust control, and the EPA and the state agencies have allowed flowback water to be captured under the same code as produced water. So then that would mean that it's okay to use either one if in the state regs you're allowed to use one for dust control.
All right, and, Rick, question for you. You were talking about blast zones and everything else. With them going in to put a larger main in at a higher pressure, would FERC look into whether or not they can actually go back in the same trench?
They may look at that, but it's not going to be a major obstacle. It's just, even a 20, you're going to obviously have a wider hole. They'll have to widen it, but that's not that big an obstacle.
Well, I'm saying if the lines are, say, 5 foot apart right now.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
If the lines were, say, 5 foot apart now, and you're going in and putting a line which has more explosive potential, shouldn't they be moving that line further away so that if, God forbid, one goes, it doesn't take the second one with it?
Common sense would say to do that, but if it really requires them to widen the right-of-way, they may resist that. Depending on the pipeline, the pipeline when it ruptures may or may not take out the next door lines, if you were the next neighboring lines. There's a lot of calculations they do. I hate to be engineers, because it depends on the specifics of the incident, which you have to assume, and that isn't always right. But it would put the lines closer, so where you might take out a secondary line, that's a fair call. But the 42 inch is going to be that's going to be the real energy releaser.
I mean, in your past experience in looking at these things, right now they're looking at, I heard that the existing line was 550 PSI. You said it's 700. And they're looking to go into 850. So they're still looking at a 20% increase in the operating pressure. If the existing facility could take that, would they even need to redo the 42-inch line? Couldn't they use the existing facility and just boost the pressure?
Well, there's a limitation to there's a what they call a maximum allowable operating pressure, which is determined by a series of tests. And you only have to do the test. You could have done the test 50 years ago. In some cases, you can even grandfather without the test. I won't get into that, but most lines have gone through hydro testing or some sort of testing, and so that'll lock in the parameter, maximum allowable operating pressure, and they can't change that parameter unless they go through another series of tests. Now, for a gas pipeline, the most efficient pipeline operation is to operate as close to maximum allowable operating pressure as you can, because you get lower actual gas velocities. So that's just a natural tendency to want to run the pressures to what the line is capable of doing and certified to run to. And the key is to keep that line, regardless of its age, so that it can handle the maximum allowable operating pressure without failing.
Hey, thank you, sir.
Be a tendency for these guys to run their pressures. They may already be there. We don't know. That's the kind of stuff that they don't disclose readily unless you really pursue it.
This is a question for Rick. So you kept pushing that FERC recognizes environmental regulations and environmental impacts. And so the current gas lines go through wetlands that probably didn't have regulations on them, but have since have regulations on them saying that they are, protected by certain things from our town of Cortland. So will this new pipeline have to follow the town's wetland regulations?
You're asking me to do a lawyer answer, and you can get 100 different answers from 100 different attorneys. I'd say the hook is, don't underestimate the environmental hooks. Now, whether or not the state or local agency has the power to get FERC's attention is going to depend on how uniform the groups act. But that is a bona fide, in fairness, FERC may consider a major damage to a wetlands, may consider it. Now, will they just blow through a wetlands? That depends on the situation. So I don't want to overstate the capabilities, but that is one of their charters, is to look at how complete the DIS is, or EIS, whatever you want to call the final version. But there's a lot of EISs where they haven't done their detailed work, okay, and FERC just accepts it. So I don't want to cause you to lose hope, but you need to, that's a way for you to really get their attention. Now, if you were going to talk about pipeline safety, FERC's probably just going to say, well, that's pipeline safety, it's not our jurisdiction. So you do have more power under the environmental stuff, but you really got to have your act together.
Okay, this question has to do with the quality of life. The village of Buchanan, we surround, I should say, Lake Mihoa. The town of Cortland has other bodies of water. We have the Croton Reservoir. We also have a lot of people that are growing older and wanting to sell their homes. In Louisiana, what was the impact in the real estate? And this would also, as everything has to be disclosed, I presume all of this will have to be disclosed if you go through a realtor.
Yep, in Louisiana, we have some new regulations based on what happened in Bayou Corn with the salt dome cavern that collapsed from the side. It all depends on the real estate agent, how much is divulged. Frequently, there will be pipelines running across property that's up for sale, and no one knows the pipeline's there.
Okay, but this is the now and the present. So the laws in New York State, you must disclose you live 2 miles or a mile from Indian Point. You must disclose other things. So are you saying this is more of a state jurisdiction of what the realtors are asked to?
And because this is an existing pipeline that they're doing modifications to, it may be that if you sell something like right now, you wouldn't know where the new loops are and whether or not, because it's proposed, it's not for real.
Okay, then let's go to the school for just a moment, and that's my last question. Since all these gases and everything are going to be emitted, how do you protect the children inside the school system, aside from having them go outside and play? But what do you do to the insides? What has Louisiana done to protect their children on the inside of the school?
You educate the teachers, the staff, and the administration at the school to the point where they want to be sure that the children are safe and will work with you to protect them. But the emissions are going to be released into the air, and if there are air intakes within the school, you need to be sure it's not downwind of the prevailing winds from a compressor or a pigging station or a metering station.
Okay, thank you.
How close is that school situated in comparison to compressor stations or other facilities?
Well, there's one in Buchanan, Montrose. Furnace Woods is the farthest one away, but we're right near Indian Point. Yeah, within 3 miles. Mm-hmm. Within 2 miles, probably.
Elementary school is half a mile from a metering station.
Half a mile? Okay, half a mile.
I mean, as far as, again, this is sort of putting a Band-Aid on the situation rather than preventative, but There are air purification systems that schools could look at doing, and residents too who live nearby after the equipment's already been built if they're experiencing high levels of indoor air quality, indoor air pollution.
Good to know. Thank you.
Now, I don't know, I think this is a really simple question or a complex question, but I want to know why do you think FERC doesn't care about the health impacts?
Ask how FERC is funded. Ask Rick how FERC is funded.
How is FERC funded?
More importantly, what is the natural gas acts, the series of natural gas acts, are really, they're commerce. They're driven by commerce. And so that's their primary charter. You know, I don't want to claim and give FERC all its powers, but the acts that formed the predecessor to FERC that became FERC, they're driven by interstate commerce. And so gas is money. It's commerce.
Right.
That's their primary focus. I'm not trying to downplay their role. That's just the realities of what the laws of the act say. And the words like safety and that don't get as much emphasis as commerce. That's one way to look at it.
Well, I understand it's all commerce, but don't they care about the health of the population? They don't. They don't. I mean, it's...
Show me the money.
I mean, I don't know, I don't have words to say how awful that is.
Well, I wouldn't...
Maybe it's very naive of me, but I just...
Legitimate issues you still can do that. And they, if they're done in a way that gets their attention, there are issues, and you've heard some today, where FERC has had to adjust. And so I don't want to make it sound like it's a rubber stamp, but if you spend a lot of time talking about pipeline safety, you're probably not going to get listened a lot. But if you've got environmental issues or public safety issues that are focused, make a lot of sense, are not as emotional, again, I'm not downplaying the importance of emotion, but FERC has to make a decision driven by their charter.
And public health impacts and concerns are often related to air pollution and environmental concerns, right? They're part and parcel. So really where you can have the most impact is to make sure FERC is going to do a full environmental impact assessment of the project, and and make sure that they're actually doing air quality, a full analysis of the air quality impacts, which they often don't do. The law, we believe the council that they are required to do that. It stipulates under the National Environmental Policy Act that they need to do that. A lot of times they'll try to skirt it. I know Earth Justice was involved. They're a national group that was involved in some litigation on this. We have not gotten any favorable rulings in court, unfortunately. But nonetheless, we still continue to push that. For FERC to look at what are the potential impacts from allowing this type of expansion to occur. What is it going to induce more development in other places, and if so, what are those impacts? What are all the downstream impacts? So it's all, again, part of the analysis is required by them. And then the other part too, just expand. They should be doing alternatives analysis, and you should really push them to not only look at what are other alternatives to getting gas to the market, because a lot of times they'll say, well, this project is designed to get X amount of gas to the end market. And so we have to figure out the different ways of doing that. Now, that being said, it's not, it has happened before. I have seen situations where public comment at the scoping hearings and meetings did actually cause the company to come back and propose alternative routes that weren't through neighborhoods, or they went somewhere else, or they made modifications. They did come back with better compressor station technologies, etc. That has happened, but we should also be pushing FERC to do the alternatives analysis that really matter, which are, if this gas is going to be used to generate electricity, which a big portion of it probably will be, then what are other alternative options for producing that energy? What are energy efficiency programs that gas utility companies implement that would reduce the demand for gas at the end market? And what does it look like for the expansion not to occur at all? And that has to be part of the full impacts analysis.
Thank you. I have a question. As you know, Indian Point is on a fault line.
Two fault lines.
Two fault lines, okay. I want to know if you can give an evaluation of how much danger there is to Indian Point via earthquakes from either the blasting that they want to do to install the new pipeline or a possible eruption or explosion of a pipeline. Is that an environmental issue that we could bring up, you know, with FERC? That, I mean, it seems to me it's a pretty big one. So is there a danger to Indian Point, the spent fuel or any other part of Indian Point from the blasting or an eruption of the pipeline or explosion?
Rick, that sounds like a question for you.
That's why I get the big bucks. The answer is, and I think it's real clear, the facility itself needs to be reviewed by FERC or some other agency such that, you know, we heard talk about the fuel rods. Now, you know, the buildings can take blast, but that doesn't mean it isn't going to kill people, all right? I want to be real clear here. I hate to be so blunt. But the buildings may stand, but they'll be highly damaged. This is on a 42-inch rupture. Now, is that damage such that it's going to cause a radioactive release? That's the issue.
Right.
And I think what you're hearing earlier here is the fuel rod storage issue needs to really be tied down. The building structure may come down and the rods may not get released, you know, in terms of a serious rupture blast. But those are things that, you know, the layout of the nuclear plant site needs to be evaluated. And a lot of that stuff is like super secret. But it's fundamentally, if you've got a serious gas pipeline rupture, while it can cause extensive damage, maybe even the shutdown of the power facility, will it cause a radioactive failure? And that's an issue that you and I aren't going to answer, but somebody in the government needs to do that, all right? And if they can't do that, then you need to move that 42-inch line further away from the plant.
Right. And also the earthquake issue, could that cause an earthquake to, you know, the blasting or the rupture, could that cause an earthquake and then also affecting Indian Point?
Well, I can't talk about how the earthquake could affect the Indian Point nuclear plant. What I can comment on is the science of earth faults and earthquake threats on pipelines has been well established for many decades. And a pipeline operator should be able to defend. If they're going to put a 42-inch across an earthquake fault, they better damn well have an analysis that says this pipeline will ride this thing out.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick clarification. When Indian Point was built, it was known that it was when Indian Point was built, it was known that they were building on the Rambo Fault. In about 2008, 2009, I believe, the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory of Columbia University discovered that there's actually a second seismic fault. It's called the Stanford to Peekskill Fault that intersects the Ramapo within 1 mile of Indian Point 3. It's why Indian Point 3 has been defined as the one nuclear reactor in the country that has the highest probability of having reactor core damage from seismic activity. Despite this, NRC and Entergy simply poo-poo it and say it's not a problem, because their records go back 300 years, and in geological terms, 300 years is a blink. So there are real threats, and the NRC doesn't care.
Okay, thank you.
This compressor station, it's a 12,600 horsepower, is actually sited right in a residential community. There are 9/11 first responders living there, young families. The house across the street has 4 young children, it's 650 feet from this compressor station. And you will see these are invisible.
They're invisible to the naked eye, but when you look through the IR lens of the camera, you will see these, and it's basically hydrocarbon and thermal plumes you're seeing. And when she starts it, you see with the visible eye, you don't see it. but you look at the velocity and the height of the plumes. That's normal operating procedures for a compressor station at Minisink. And remember, the ones in New York that are being proposed on the AIM are much bigger.
It's off of Dingle Ridge Road, just before you get to the overpass of I-84, on a little road called Tulip. And it's at the very end of Tulip. It's on 70 acres behind a huge gate that you can't get in. And they're not giving tours right now, not until next spring, because it's highly operational. You can't hear anything in there right now. And it's 40,000 horsepower already, with an additional 12 coming. It's going to be huge, huge.
Huge.
Minisink was 13.
12.6. Yeah. So, now you get a sense of what we're actually dealing with.
From our town? Is that paint?
Well, you need to talk to Tony Hay, the supervisor, and tell him
Well, that's southeast, but Nancy and I are from North Salem, and no town board member is here.
Okay, well, we're going to have a video. As you see, thank you so much to our videographer, Nick, and to Bill, and to Marcia, and to the Mahopac Library, and to our
Louisa.
co-sponsors, and Louisa, our assistant doing the Skype. The co-sponsors, we were very, very grateful. I really want to mention this. There were over 50 groups who signed on to co-sponsor with us because they know how important this is, the gas infrastructure and this project, what it symbolizes. And they respect Wilma and Nadia and Matt and Rick so much as well. So we want to thank them very much for all of that. And Rick. I said Rick.
One other little thing, please. It was mentioned earlier by the speakers that involved agencies are going to have to issue permits, as well as FERC putting their stamp on it. If you don't have a copy of this on the back table because they've gone, our website, SAPE, SAPE 2016, which is when they want to be operational with this, .org, we have this listed there. And it's so important to get involved and to help. We want to encourage everybody, please, to make a comment by January 31st, that's the deadline, on this creation of the EIS. And the more scientific you can make your comment, as was coached before, the better. Anything you think of that makes them have to analyze this project with more detail, taking them longer, better. Please contact your federal officials. Again, as Susan mentioned, at our website, we've made quite a list available for the contact information. And as Nancy just said, you and I must work together, Nancy, to get this town board involved on this project. And everybody must bring their own town board in, their own legislator, their own state assembly person. Everybody has got to get involved, or this will just go right through. And please, there's an energy brochure on the table. This is the solution. This madness of fossil fuel cannot continue with us on the planet. The energy brochure lists the renewable energies, the incentives, the way all homeowners and businesses can get involved with different forms of safe energy. And we encourage you to please write a letter to the editor of your local paper. This is what a lot of people read, are the letters to the editors, and this is how we can educate other people and grow this movement. So we thank you. We wish you would join SAPE, and together let us rise up and say no to fossil fuels and yes to a sane energy program. We thank our beloved speakers so deeply, each of you for coming, and Rick and Matt, thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you all for coming. Good evening.